Have you ever wondered if SNAP fraud is really draining billions from taxpayers, or if it's one of the most exaggerated political talking points in America? Every time you scroll the news or hear a political speech, you'll see stories about people abusing food stamps, buying junk food, or selling their EBT cards for cash. But when you actually look at the numbers and the facts, the reality may surprise you. Today, we're diving into the truth behind SNAP fraud, how big it really is, who's involved, and why it's become such a heated debate in American politics. Welcome back to Social Security Post. If you care about Social Security SNAP and benefit programs that millions of seniors, families, and disabled Americans rely on, then this is the channel for you. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure you stay until the very end of this video, because I'm going to reveal some numbers that might completely change how you see the fraud debate. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, is the largest food assistance program in the United States. It serves around 40 million Americans every single month, and despite the stigma, most of the people on the program are children, seniors, disabled adults, or people in low-wage working families. It's not designed to give people luxury or comfort. It's designed to prevent hunger and reduce food insecurity. On average, a household only gets about $6.20 per person per day to help cover food costs. This program matters because it reduces poverty, improves nutrition for children, and has long-term benefits on education and health outcomes. SNAP isn't about handouts. It's about ensuring people don't go hungry in one of the wealthiest nations in the world. When critics talk about fraud, it's important to remember that they're talking about a system that literally keeps food on the table for millions of struggling families. If you've ever seen viral news clips or memes about food stamps, you've probably noticed that the narrative is always the same: people abusing the system, bragging about their benefits, or buying luxury items they shouldn't. These headlines are designed to make the problem look massive. Politicians often amplify these stories because they know outrage sells. It gets voters angry and talking. But reality paints a very different picture. The USDA's own audits consistently show that fraud in SNAP is around 1% of benefits issued. That means that for every $100 spent in the program, $99 are used exactly as intended. Compare that with the exaggerated stories we hear, and it becomes clear that perception and reality are two very different things. Let's dig into the data. SNAP operates with a budget of over $100 billion per year, but actual fraud accounts for about $1 to $2 billion annually. While that might sound like a lot, put it in perspective. Medicare loses around $60 to $100 billion every year to fraud, and tax evasion costs the U.S. government hundreds of billions annually. SNAP fraud, by comparison, is a tiny fraction of total government losses. The program has actually gotten better at reducing fraud over time. Back in the 1990s, trafficking rates were as high as 4 cents on the dollar. Thanks to electronic benefit transfer, EBT cards, and better oversight, that number has dropped to just 1 cent on the dollar today. That makes SNAP one of the most efficient federal programs in terms of fraud prevention. When people talk about SNAP fraud, what they usually mean is trafficking. This happens when someone sells their EBT card benefits to a store or another person in exchange for cash, often at a discount. For example, someone might sell $100 in benefits for $60 or $70 in cash. Most of this type of fraud happens through small convenience stores that are willing to break the rules. There's also a smaller category of fraud involving misreporting income or household size to qualify for more benefits. But again, this is rare, and when caught, the penalties are steep. It's important to recognize that the vast majority of people on SNAP, families, seniors, and working households, use their benefits exactly as intended, to buy groceries and feed their families. When fraud does occur, the system doesn't take it lightly. The USDA and state agencies actively investigate suspicious activity. This could mean tracking unusual spending patterns, such as benefits being used far outside the recipient's state or large repeated purchases at questionable retailers. If someone is caught committing fraud, the consequences are severe. Individuals can be permanently disqualified from SNAP, face fines, or even criminal charges. Retailers involved in trafficking risk losing their licenses, heavy financial penalties, and even prison time. These punishments are part of why fraud rates have stayed so low in the modern era. One of the biggest reasons fraud is now at historic lows is technology. The old paper food stamp system made it easy to trade benefits for cash. But with EBT cards, every single purchase is logged, tracked, and analyzed. States and the USDA use algorithms to flag suspicious patterns, such as benefits being spent at odd hours or in high amounts at the same store repeatedly. Technology has also made it easier for investigators to focus resources where they're needed most. Instead of random checks, they can zero in on actual problem areas. As a result, SNAP today is one of the most closely monitored programs in the country, and fraud levels are far lower than most people realize. One of the most common misconceptions is that SNAP is full of lazy people who don't want to work, but the numbers tell a very different story. Over 70% of all SNAP participants are families with children, and about 1/3 of recipients live in working households. That means parents are working, but their wages are so low that they still qualify for help putting food on the table. SNAP also helps seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities. In fact, millions of older Americans rely on SNAP to supplement their Social Security checks, which often aren't enough to cover food and medicine. Far from being a program for freeloaders, SNAP is a lifeline for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Here's the problem. When fraud myths are exaggerated, lawmakers sometimes use that as an excuse to cut funding. But the real cost of those cuts is borne by honest families. If you cut SNAP benefits by even a small percentage, millions of children, seniors, and disabled Americans immediately feel the impact in their daily meals. Economists also point out that SNAP is an investment. Every $1 in SNAP spending generates about $1.50 to $1.80 in local economic activity because recipients spend those benefits quickly at local grocery stores. Cutting SNAP based on a distorted picture of fraud doesn't just hurt poor families, it weakens local economies too. When critics attack SNAP, they often make it sound like fraud is the biggest problem in government spending. But let's compare. SNAP fraud costs around $1 to $2 billion per year. Medicare fraud, on the other hand, costs 30 to 50 times more. Tax evasion costs hundreds of billions annually, dwarfing SNAP losses. So why does SNAP get so much attention? Because it's highly visible, tied to poverty, and easy to politicize. It's simpler to show a photo of someone misusing food stamps than it is to explain complex tax loopholes or corporate fraud. But if we're serious about saving taxpayer money, SNAP fraud is one of the smallest problems on the list. SNAP fraud is often weaponized in political debates because it taps into deep emotions about fairness, work, and responsibility. Politicians know that showing one or two examples of abuse can spark outrage and create a narrative of lazy people living off the system. That anger can then be used to justify cuts or new restrictions. But the truth is, most fraud numbers don't support the outrage. SNAP has one of the lowest fraud rates of any major federal program, and politicians highlight it not because it's a massive drain, but because it's an easy way to divide voters. It's less about facts and more about playing on emotions. Another common area of confusion is around what SNAP benefits can be used for. Critics often point to people buying soda, chips, or candy and call it fraud. But let's be clear, it is perfectly legal to buy those items with SNAP. The law allows it, just like it allows bread, milk, or meat. The real debate is whether SNAP should restrict junk food purchases. Some argue that banning soda and candy would improve nutrition, while others argue it would unfairly stigmatize low-income families and add more government red tape. But these are policy debates, not fraud. Calling legal purchases fraud only fuels misconceptions. Instead of cutting benefits or blaming recipients, there are smart ways to reduce fraud further. Strengthening oversight at the retailer level, where most trafficking happens, is one. Increasing access to larger grocery stores, where fraud is less likely, is another. Technology can continue to flag suspicious patterns without making life harder for honest families. Education also plays a role. Many recipients don't even realize what counts as fraud, like selling part of their benefits or misreporting household details. Outreach and awareness, combined with strong enforcement, keep the fraud rate low without punishing the millions of people who rely on SNAP for survival. So what's the bottom line? SNAP fraud exists, but it's rare, heavily monitored, and severely punished when caught. The image of widespread abuse simply doesn't match the numbers. SNAP remains one of the most effective anti-poverty programs in America, and cutting it based on myths would do more harm than good. Thank you for watching today's deep dive here at Social Security Post. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think SNAP fraud is exaggerated for political reasons, or do you believe stricter rules are needed? Drop your comments and questions below. I do my best to reply to as many of you as possible. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you found it useful. Until next time, stay informed and take care.